Hey, Shalom, Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh, Bashem Yahushai, Bashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwath. May listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Rukwai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to talk about AI. And eventually, with all these different advancements with AI is trying to turn into one of the gods, or a god, I should say, just like in the ancient times, right? But it's now it's becoming more of a modern day idol, where a lot of people actually flock to in terms of trying to get counsel, career advice, understanding, comfort, what I'm saying? Like all these different things, people are turning to, the use of AI for. And, one of the things that's very interesting is that it's starting to become like a one-stop shop, and AI is basically, so now you have, for example, you have AI companions, you have AI girlfriends, you have certain chatbots, and it's now bleeding into all these different facets of the society where, it's doing away with the need for people. There's no longer a need for people anymore, where AI is basically just kind of covering different grounds in different industries, where a lot of human services that actually require a lot of human personal contact, it's basically it's AI is becoming and fulfilling all those roles, right? But this is something I just want to discuss and kind of just flow with this topic in regards to what AI is becoming, right? And true wisdom doesn't, you're not gonna find that with AI, right? So I wanted to start off with this precept here. Um, this is Isaiah chapter 45, verse 5. And it says here, "For I am the Lord Yahweh, Bashem Yahushai, and there is none else. There is no God beside me. I have girded thee, thou hast not known me." And it says, verse 6, "That they may know from the rising of the sun and from the west, that there is none beside me. I am the Lord, there is none else. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things," right? So all these different events that are playing on and occurring upon, the planet, whether it may be good, whether it may be judgment, whether it's good or bad, all these things are happening at the Lord's will. The prophecies are happening, are occurring, or are playing out, I should say, because that's the Lord's will, right? So, AI basically is not able to give that sort of understanding. It's essentially, it's just a tool that is basically shaped by men's hands, and the so-called, you know, um, higher up, owners. Like you have, for example, you have what's this guy's name? Elon Musk and what's his name? Sam Altman. These guys, they're basically like the modern day Chaldeans, of this world. And I say that because in the ancient times, especially ancient Babylon, the Chaldeans were basically kind of like the astrologers, the guy, the so-called the wise men of that time. They were the wise men at that time, to be able to give understanding in regards to certain things and certain events that were playing upon, on the earth, right? So, for example, they studied, the stars and, so on and so forth, right? By looking at different phenomena in the heavens to be able to make certain predictions of what's going to happen upon the planet. But, their gods are pretty much, are pretty much dead. There is no other God besides the Lord Yahweh Bashim Shai. And the scriptures say that, the the idols. Let me get it 1 second. The gods, I believe it's the gods of the nations, are idols. How people treat these things. It's essentially becoming, likened unto an idol. This is Psalms chapter 96, verse 5. For it says, "For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord Yahweh Bashim Shai made, the heavens," right? So, all these different gods, they are just idols that are crafted by man's hands, and that includes AI as well. You have all these big data centers that's actually required, to actually be able to um to continue to keep these things alive, right? Just like how you had in the ancient times, you needed a craftsman, you needed skilled workers, woodworkers, carpenters, maybe people who do particular carvings, silversmiths. You needed people to be able to manage the welfare, of these different pieces of technology, of that time, right? So when you, for example, if you saw like a statue, or like a bear that was carved with wood, for example, you needed a woodworker to be able to shave off the different pieces to shape it into something. And then what did people the ancient times do? They reference that as that idol. They didn't you needed people to is that my point really is that you needed people to be able to manage these things, right? And the same concept applies with AI as well. You need people, to be able to manage these things. Like, for example, I saw an article yesterday how the AI data centers, they require, there was one, I believe, in Georgia, um and a lot of these data centers, they require a lot of water to be able to manage, these data centers, right? And in the article it said that it needed approximately 44 um Olympic size swimming pools of water to be able to manage these data centers, right? So, my point is, the people who create these things, they are needed to be able to manage these different, uh, 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 constructs of the ancient times. Just like how you need people to be able to manage this infrastructure, what people use today as AI to be able to answer all their different questions and answers, and be the counselors, be their comfort buddies, and so on and so forth. It's the same, that which is then is now, as the scriptures say, and ultimately there is no new thing under the sun, right? So, when it comes to, let me get this in Jeremiah, because a lot of our people are essentially caught up in that, that vibration. There's something I wanted to get that Jeremiah said. Give me 1 second. Let me see. This is Jeremiah 2 verse 11, and it says, "Have the nation changed their gods, which are yet no gods? But my people have changed their glory for that which doth not profit. Be astonished, O ye heavens, at this, and be afraid, and be very desolate, saith the Lord. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and have hewn them out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water," right? So, I read this because, a lot of our people, they use these things, you know, to be able to, get some sort of, comfort. Our people are really missing, they have, we are really the ones that, you so-called blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, and you speckled bird Israelites that look like the other nations, but go back to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All these different, we have basically taken on and sought out a lot of these idols, for understanding, right? you know Like for example, in the islands you have something called like obia, right? And basically, it's really just somebody who has a familiar spirit, to be able to give you understanding in regards to certain things, right? But obia was actually the practice. I'm sorry, but it really goes back to ob, which is like a somebody who's like a witch doctor, somebody who is what do you call those things? Like a, I don't want to say a warlock, but essentially somebody, able to consult with, spirits of the dead, consult with, conjure up certain, spirits, kind of like how the kind of like the Witch of Endor, if that makes sense. You have that's very prominent, in the islands, right? So our people's, they get into these different abominable practices, but you have a creator, you have a maker, right? But what is, as the scriptures say, the ox knoweth his owner and the ass his master's crib, but our people don't consider, right? And our people are really going to get real wisdom and understanding really, from, the prophets, because the prophets were really designed to be able to lead our people back to, the Lord, right? And that's where you would really get proper, counsel from, right? But there's something I wanted to read. I wanted to read a little bit of this, here in regards to AI, in regards to, how idols were seen in the ancient times, and a lot of our people got caught up in that idol worship, so to speak, right? Um, that's why Paul said, that you were Gentiles carried away after these dumb idols, as you were led, right? Because, pursuant to the curses, we eventually will be scattered, onto all these different areas of the over the world, and then we will worship those particular idols, right? And how much more, that this idol that is being used to basically, it's not even always, it is sometimes, and that's another thing also I noticed about AI, it doesn't always give you truthful answers. A lot of the times it can give you things that you just want, something, it gives you understanding in regards to what the user just wants to hear, rather than actual, straight truth, you know right? So you kind of have to learn how to, use it and prompt it, specifically and properly. But I wanted to read this here. This is Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 13, verse 1 in the GNT. And it says, anyone who does not know the Most High, Yahweh Bashmal Shai, is simply foolish. Such people look at good things around them and still fail to see the living power. They study the things he made, yet they have not recognized the one who made them, right? So, Esau is the type of person that he would study, how certain things are like put together, but they don't actually consider the actual workmaster. They don't actually consider the ultimate creator of those things that are, created, right? But they're overly fascinated by the thing, the creation itself, right? So for example, if you go into an art gallery, you see like this painting, you know, and people marvel at the painting, but they don't actually consider who the painter was. You know what I'm saying? Um, it says in verse 2, instead they suppose that the gods who rule the world are fire or wind or the storm or the circling stars, or the rushing water or the heavenly bodies. People were so delighted by these things that they thought they must be gods. But they should have realized that these things have a master, and that he is much greater than all of them. For he is the creator of beauty, and he created them, right? So, the nations, they always had, you know, their own, for example, their own idols that they went to, you know, right? They, for example, I think the Philistines, they had Dagon, if I'm not mistaken, right? They had, all these different idols. Oh, that's another example. There's another example with the Assyrian king named Sennacherib. Eventually, when the Lord destroyed his army, right? During the time of King Hezekiah, I believe it was he went back to Nineveh, and he went back into the house of his god. His god was named Nisroch, right? So all these different nations, they had their own idols, and they and all these different idols, that's another thing also, all these different idols require certain abominable sacrifices, right? So continuing on here, and it says here, since the people are amazed at the power of these things, they behave, I'm sorry, they ought to learn from them that their maker is far more powerful. And that's true, right? And it says, and when we realize how vast and beautiful the creation is, we ought to be learning at the creator at the same time. But people don't consider these things. They don't consider, because if you live under a base man, then a lot of your understanding is gonna be very base, because Esau is the type of person that would just research, certain things. He researched, the certain events that occurred upon the planet, but he doesn't, because he's a natural man, he can't receive the things, of the spirit, right? And our people have taken on that same sort of mentality, even though there are more of a they're supposed to be more of a spiritual people, they take on very natural based qualities, right? So that's why there's a lot of um disbelief when it comes to certain events that have occurred within the scriptures. For example, the Lord's judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah, those particular cities, Jonah, being swallowed up, and so on and so forth, right? Because they're under this is what happens when you're under rulership under a base man, right? Because he doesn't he if his understanding confines the Lord into a box, right? And if that's the same case, and he pushes a pseudoscience, a false science, right? False knowledge, really, and he pushes that vibration onto the people because he's in charge of all the schools, the universities, and in charge of the kinds of content that you subscribe to and you learn, right? So that's what happens, so let me jump down. I wanted to read this. Hold on. A skilled worker, this is verse 11. A skilled worker may saw down a suitable tree, carefully strip off the bark, and then, with skillful craftsmanship, make it an object that will serve some useful purpose. He will then take the leftover pieces and use them as firewood to cook a meal that he can sit down to enjoy. But among the scrap wood, he may take one piece that isn't good for anything, maybe it's crooked and full of knots, and carefully carve it into his leisure time, using spare moments to shape it into a crude image of a person, or maybe some worthless animal. He paints it all over with red, covering it up every flaw in the work, right? So just like how you had skilled craftsmen, artisans, silversmiths, metal workers, iron workers who used to take things out of the earth to be able to form them and then to be able to make them into a certain kind of image, right, into something that they would create. They might paint it, they might put clothes on it. It's the same concept applies with AI as well. They have all these AI, like I'll just use this new trend known as like AI girlfriends. You have you have all this different phenomenon where, like, okay, people are they're naming their chatbots. They have all these different names. They have this Gemini, Abby, what I'm saying, and they dress it up. They can customize it. It's all likened onto these idols of the ancient times, right? The only difference is that this idol now that people are really really paying attention to, it's all digital, right? Now they're using it, they talk to it, they give it, they let it, it answers your questions, it makes them, feel better about, career advice. It makes them, feel more comforted in regards to certain situations. And sometimes, a lot of times, when you really examine AI, a lot of the times it won't give you, it won't aid. It doesn't give you full understanding of prophecy, because the scriptures talk about how the Lord would give his secrets unto his servants, the prophets, right? The people who create these things are likened unto those different false prophets, or false soothsayers and prognosticators of the ancient times, right? Like the Chaldeans, like I mentioned before, right? The people who create these things, right? Um, so that's pretty much, the point I kind of just wanted to hit, because people look into these things, and you're not gonna find true understanding, when it comes to AI, and so on and so forth, right? Especially when it comes to like prophecy, you're not gonna find that utilizing AI, right? This is Proverbs chapter 1, verse 20, and it says, "Wisdom crieth without, she uttereth her voice in the streets. She crieth in the chief place of concourse, in the openings of the gates," right? So where a lot of business and is taking place, in the openings of the gates, and she in the city, she uttereth her voice, saying, "How long, ye simple ones, will ye love simplicity? And the scorners delight in scorning, they're scorning, I'm sorry, and fools hate knowledge," right? So, that's really, where you're gonna get, true wisdom from, not from these different idols, you know, and that's through the Lord's servants, the prophets, right? With our elders, apostles, on down, right? So that's not, you're not gonna get true wisdom, from these different AI tools, right? So, anyways, I just wanted to read that, real quick. And, Lord's will, this is just quick and edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.